Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Jim.
And we are genuinely glad you've pulled up a chair to join us at the table today.
Absolutely.
Because whether you are prepping for a big meeting or maybe out for your daily walk or just trying to make sense of the current cultural landscape, you are definitely in the right place. Today, our mission is to explore this really profound essay by John Novick Jr. It's a standout piece from his ongoing series, America Actually.
It really is.
And alongside his written reflections, we are also examining some visual context from the specific event he attended.
Yeah, it's a remarkable piece of writing. And it functions on multiple levels, really.
Right.
We are looking at how a very specific recent event, a public wake in Chicago, serves as an incredibly clear mirror for our current political and social climate.
Wow, yeah.
It forces us to examine the mechanics of how movements are actually built.
That is the crux of it. We are going to explore how a specific political strategy forged all the way back in 1988 just might hold the absolute blueprint for our future. Okay, let's unpack this.
To set the scene, John Novick Jr. attended the public wake for Reverend Jackson.
That's right.
This was on Thursday, February 26, 2026. He notes in his essay that he managed to squeeze his visit in right between the morning and evening rushes in Chicago.
Which is no small feat in that city.
Exactly. Novick traveled down to the Operation Push headquarters in the Kenwood neighborhood. And looking at the visual context we have from that day, the scene outside is immediately striking.
It really is.
There's this massive prominent signage.
Yeah, the sign reads, Operation Push National Headquarters, Dr. King's Workshop.
Right.
The atmosphere outside, it paints a very specific picture of a major televised historical event. Because right there, parked out front, is a hearse. You have media cameras set up on risers, completely focused on capturing this monumental moment for the evening news broadcast.
All the major networks.
Exactly. And draped above the entrance is this heavy, striking bunting in purple, black, and green. It is the literal visual definition of a highly publicized, heavy historical moment.
But then Novick walks inside.
Yes.
And the contrast between that external media environment and the internal reality is staggering.
Totally different world.
He doesn't find a chaotic media circus or some stiff, formal political event.
No.
Instead, he finds a deeply loving, peaceful gathering of grateful Chicagoans. He writes extensively about receiving an incredibly thoughtful, kind, and generous welcome.
Which brings us to a really key observation.
What's fascinating here is how the mood inside that room perfectly mirrored the overarching mission of the organization itself.
Right.
You have this juxtaposition, the external reality of the cameras, the news anchors, the sheer weight of a major historical figure passing, contrasted with the internal, quiet reality of the community.
Because for the people inside, this wasn't about the spectacle.
Not at all. The warmth Novick felt wasn't a performance put on for the cameras parked out on the street. It was the authentic, lived realization of decades of community building.
And that brings us directly to the name of the organization itself.
Right, Operation PUSH.
Because the name is doing incredibly heavy lifting here. Let's break down the headquarters name. It carries a powerful double meaning that directly informs what Novick experienced.
Yeah, let's look at the first meaning.
First, it's an acronym. It stands for People United to Save Humanity.
Which is a massive goal.
It is. But when you look at that acronym, it directly connects to the thoughtful, kind, and generous welcome Novick received.
Exactly.
The underlying philosophy seems to be that you cannot possibly be united to save humanity in the abstract if you aren't first kind, generous, and welcoming to the actual human being standing right in front of you in a viewing line.
That physical handshake, that immediate warmth, it translates perfectly to the broader political strategy.
How?
Well, it grounds a massive, lofty, goal-saving humanity right down into the micro level of a warm greeting and a shared moment of grief and gratitude. You cannot build a mass movement for humanity if you despise the individuals who make up that humanity.
That is so true. And then we have the second meaning. PSH functions as a single, powerful action verb.
Right.
It suggests that lasting, meaningful change does not happen passively. You can't just sit back, be kind, and wait for the world's systems to fix themselves.
Right. Kindness isn't enough on its own.
Exactly. It requires one to push things forward with actual intentional force. It demands friction. It demands an unyielding insistence on justice.
And that duality is the absolute core of the organization's history and, frankly, the history of successful civil rights movements movements in general.
Yeah.
It is the welcoming, open embrace on one hand and the forceful, unyielding demand for systemic change on the other.
Which is not easy to do.
Finding an organization that successfully maintains both of those postures simultaneously is exceptionally rare.
Novick captures the weight of that duality beautifully in his essay. He writes that after he went through the viewing line, he sat in a pew.
For about 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes, and just sat there taking it all in. He marveled at the lingering power, the unity, the community, and the sheer gratitude that the physical space still holds. Even so many years after Reverend Jackson's prime in the public eye,
The energy was still there.
I want you, the listener, to just imagine that for a moment. Imagine sitting in that pew on a cold February afternoon in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Think about feeling the historical weight of a room that was literally built on the premise of forcing systemic change, while simultaneously holding on to the mandate of saving humanity through profound kindness.
It is a totally unique atmosphere to occupy. Usually, spaces historically dedicated to forceful political change are heavily charged with lingering tension.
Or combativeness. Yeah.
Exactly. To sit in a space of force that is also bathed in peaceful gratitude, that speaks to a very specific kind of legacy.
Right.
And that legacy is rooted in a highly effective, revolutionary political strategy.
That strategy is really the core of Jackson's historical impact, and honestly, it's what makes this deep dive so relevant to the current moment. We aren't just looking at a historical retrospective here.
No, we are looking at a functional blueprint.
Exactly.
To understand the power of the room Novick was sitting in, we have to deeply understand Jackson's approach to coalition building.
Let's get into it.
He championed the idea of forming a supermajority. But this supermajority was uniquely composed of a coalition of so-called minorities.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Because the strategy was brilliant in its mathematical and social execution. Traditional political theory, it often relies on capturing a monolithic, silent majority.
Or fighting over a very narrow strip of median voters.
Right. But Jackson's strategy inverted that. He looked at various marginalized groups, people who individually were considered minorities and often lacked systemic power within the establishment.
We're talking about working-class voters.
Labor unionists.
Diverse racial and ethnic groups.
Oppressive activists and rural farmers.
Right. Individually, the political establishment treated these groups as disparate, competing even.
But Jackson's strategy was to unite them under a shared umbrella of common needs and shared grievances, specifically around economic justice and equitable access.
Yeah.
When you unite those so-called minorities, they collectively form a formidable supermajority.
And this impartial historical fact is crucial to remember when analyzing modern politics. This strategy energized a massive movement that sought a more inclusive, equitable, and just future for everyone.
Everyone.
It wasn't an exclusionary tactic. It was inherently inclusionary. And it wasn't just theoretical political science classroom talk either. It led directly to Jackson finishing second in the Democratic primary for President of the United States in 1988.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this supermajority strategy fundamentally shifted the landscape of American politics.
Yeah, he did.
It validated the power of coalition building in a way that had not been proven on a presidential primary stage to that extent before. By bringing together these diverse groups under a banner of shared economic and social justice, the strategy proved that the margins could actually become the center.
Right.
It demonstrated that you didn't have to rely solely on historically dominant voting blocs to be fiercely competitive at the highest levels of government.
I think we really need to emphasize the timeline here to fully grasp the historical weight.
Oh, absolutely.
1988, this was a full 2 decades before Barack Obama became president.
20 years.
Jackson was laying out the literal structural blueprint for how a modern, inclusive political movement could actually function and succeed in American politics. He was testing the structural integrity of a coalition that future campaigns would eventually rely on.
The structural integrity is the key phrase there, because building a coalition is one thing. Holding it together when the pressure is applied is entirely different.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
How do you keep rural farmers and urban labor unionists united when the prevailing political winds are constantly trying to pit them against one another?
Novick's essay highlights exactly how that was achieved. He brings in a quote from Abby Phillip.
He's a journalist.
Right. She recently published a biography of Jesse Jackson. And her insight cuts right to the heart of the leadership required to maintain that structural integrity.
What did she say?
She observed, and I'm quoting her directly here, What Jackson did so well that many candidates could learn from was that he channeled the anger and frustration of the American people with the status quo while painting a vision of hope and reconciliation that could unite them.
Wow. That quote serves as the skeleton key to understanding his leadership model.
It really does.
We need to critically analyze the balance Philip is talking about there because it is incredibly rare and it is brutally difficult to maintain in practice.
It seems like that balance is almost impossible to strike today because anger is such a cheap, highly effective fuel for short-term engagement.
It is.
It is incredibly easy to look at the status quo, point out its glaring flaws, and channel the resulting anger and frustration. Anger gets people out of their seats. It drives immediate action. But Philip is arguing that Jackson bypassed the trap of relying solely on anger.
Because anger is a combustible fuel. If it is your only tool, the movement eventually burns itself out.
Or worse.
Right, or worse, it turns inward and fragments as different factions begin fighting over who is the most aggrieved.
Exactly.
The much harder task, the almost impossible task for many leaders today, is to take that very valid anger and pair it simultaneously with a vision of reconciliation.
Painting a vision of hope while fully acknowledging the validity of the anger,
Yes.
it requires telling a coalition, you are absolutely right to be frustrated, the system is fundamentally broken. But in the very next breath, you have to pivot and say, here is how we fix it together, and here is how we reconcile with one another to build a shared future.
Reconciliation is the operative word. To reconcile means to bring into agreement or harmony. In the context of the 1988 supermajority, reconciling working-class white voters with urban black voters meant overcoming decades of manufactured cultural division to focus on shared economic realities.
Which is huge.
It asks people to look past their immediate ingrained grievances and see a shared humanity with the very people or systems they might be inherently distrustful of.
Yeah.
What stands out to you? Think about the political speeches you hear today, the civic movements you observe, or the media you consume. How often do you see genuine anger at the status quo paired seamlessly with a tangible, unifying vision of hope and reconciliation?
I am willing to bet the answer for most of us is very rarely.
Yeah.
It is much more common to see leaders point at the fire without ever offering a blueprint for a new house. And that brings us to the profound conclusion of Novik's essay. This is the so what of our entire deep dive today.
Okay.
Novik observes that this very specific absence, the absence of a vision of hope and reconciliation, is exactly what, in his words, we're dying from today.
Dying from today, that is a stark, heavy phrase.
It is.
But when you survey the landscape of modern civic life, the intense fragmentation, the extreme polarization, and the sheer exhaustion so many people feel regarding social engagement, his diagnosis feels incredibly accurate.
Yeah, it hits home.
We have perfected the art of channeling anger, but we have seemingly lost the capacity to paint a vision of reconciliation.
So what does this all mean? It means that Jackson's legacy isn't just a sealed chapter in a history book. It is a highly applicable framework for today.
Right.
Novik notes that even though Jackson has passed, his spirit, his work, and his inspiration endure. But a blueprint only has enduring merit if someone actually picks it up and builds with it.
We are looking at this impartially as a historical blueprint for human organization.
Exactly.
The idea of forming a supermajority of so-called minorities to demand a just system is a masterclass in mass civic organizing. When we look at modern political movements or broad civic initiatives today, we see so many factions siloed off.
Yeah, focusing entirely on their specific grievances.
Right. They remain so-called minorities in terms of influence because they refuse to unite under a broader vision of hope.
If you apply this to how citizens interact with their local or federal governments today, the lessons are glaring. If different advocacy groups, whether they are fighting for housing equity, environmental protections, or labor rights, if they only focus on their individual anger, they end up competing against each other for political capital.
They cancel each other out.
Exactly. But if they unite their frustrations while painting a vision of a thriving, interconnected society, they become a supermajority.
Yes.
They transition from competing factions into an undeniable force. They stop fighting each other and start pushing the issue forward.
It requires returning to that common denominator of humanity. That is the People United to Save Humanity, part of PUSH.
Right.
A coalition of shared anger is fragile. A coalition of shared hope is resilient. And that is why Novik, sitting in that pew for 15 minutes, is such a resonant, powerful image.
It really is.
He was just sitting in a room reflecting on the past. He was sitting in a physical space that holds the specific instructions for the future.
The legacy tells us that we do not have to settle for the friction and the division that defines so much of our current era.
No, we don't.
Looking back at Novick sitting in that Kenwood headquarters, you realize the physical space is just a monument to this larger idea.
Beautifully said.
We started our journey today on a cold February afternoon in 2026, observing the peaceful, deeply generous atmosphere inside the Operation Push headquarters during a historic wake. We explored the powerful duality of the word push, the absolute necessity of a demand for forceful change paired with the mandate to unite humanity.
And we unpacked the brilliant 1988 political strategy of building a supermajority from disparate so-called minorities, a strategy that fundamentally changed the map of American politics and laid the groundwork for future inclusive campaigns.
Right.
And crucially, we examined Abby Phillips' observation about the incredibly rare leadership trait of channeling righteous anger while simultaneously doing the grueling work of painting a vivid picture of hope and reconciliation.
It is a phenomenal reminder that the tools for repairing our fragmented society already exist. We just have to be willing to use them.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, building on what we've just discussed.
If Reverend Jackson's 1988 strategy was built in a predominantly analog world,
Right.
a world requiring literal physical rooms like the Operation POSH headquarters, where you had to shake hands, share physical space, and sit in pews with people entirely different from you to build community.
Yeah.
How does that blueprint survive today?
That's a great question.
We now exist in a digital landscape governed by algorithms designed specifically to isolate us into echo chambers and monetize our anger. Can you actually build a true supermajority of hope and reconciliation purely online? Or does lasting change still require us to step away from our screens and push forward together in the physical world?
That is a phenomenal question to carry forward and one that challenges how we all interact with our communities today. Thank you so much for joining us at the table for this deep dive. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to unpack these big historical ideas with us. Until next time.